Thank you. I don't know how many people are so brave to join your keynote just at the end of the EAA, but they must be you all. It's a pleasure to introduce shortly a colleague and a friend, mainly a friend, who is, in my view, not only one of the most outstanding researchers in the Balkans, but also one of the most engaged researchers in medieval Europe. I know Monika since a few years, but we have already fought several struggles together, mainly related to the Manifesto for the Medieval European Archaeology. Monika is not only a medieval archaeologist, she is also much engaged in gender equality, in rights, and we both share the idea that we as archaeologists can not only deal with old pottery, with dust and the past, but we must be engaged with the present and for the future. So I appreciate much what she has written, also in a not fair place, definitely less easy than to write in Italy. And I also appreciated much what she has done in the sense of theoretical approaches. This is something that medieval archaeologists not always love too much. We always think that theoretical archaeology is something that deals with prehistory. When I wrote a small, very short book in 2019, I was really amazed that actually there is such a short debate on theoretical archaeology. But Monika is one of the scholars who is engaged in this. Today she is presenting a more cultural aspect of her research, but this has a European perspective. So I don't want to waste too much time, and I prefer that she has the stage, and I will be very eager to listen to your lecture and maybe participate in the debate later. Thank you, Monika, for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Carlo, for your kind words and introduction. I would like just to ask for my PowerPoint presentation. Can you share it with the audience? And I would just say that I'm really honored to be here and to give a keynote lecture for this year's EAA. I'm really grateful. Can you hear me? I'm really grateful to organizers and to all people involved here. So I know that your time is precious here in Rome, so I will start. Okay, so the idea that all roads lead to Rome is intriguing as the...
Sorry, for me it's right to left. Maybe it should be put full screen. Because
for us it's full screen. For us it's full screen, but I'm not sure.
For me it's mirrored.
Was it okay before when I shared?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we need to share.
We will check, Carlo, now, everything. Don't worry. You will see my beautiful presentation. Yeah.
Is it okay now?
Carlo?
Yes, okay, thank you.
I'm trying to get this out of the way, but unfortunately this will be.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, it's fine. So the idea that all roads lead to Rome is intriguing, as the idiom itself would seem to suggest a cultural radiance in which outlining areas depends on centers, such as Rome. The idiom is problematic, and it would also seem to neglect all areas which the roads travel through. What I mean to say is that I think it's a distinct trap of human mind to focus on idea radiating from the center, in which priority is given to the familiar and to what is instructed as being the source of something, rather than a contributing force among many. However, it is important to provide a perspective on a periphery and its interaction with the center, as only when radiate outwards to the margins, the center becomes clearer and a full tapestry of all participants can be gathered. So to take from Aleida Assmann, the ruins of Rome are double signifiers. They encode both oblivion and memory. So when examining distorted images from the periphery, the remains from other worlds, such as may be found in graves, we can better understand what is lost and forgotten, and what was considered precious to be saved. Therefore, I have selected microscale and microhistory to create a bigger story for this presentation. Bearing this in mind, I would like to utilize the microhistory in archaeology of the early medieval Central Balkans and try to explain its wider relevance. By microhistory, I'm not just reducing the scale of observation, but similar to Carlo Ginzburg, I will highlight what had been previously unobserved, such as traces, clues, and particularities toward questions that have not been posited. As such, I will be following in the footsteps of our dear colleague Arthur Ribeiro in his research on microhistory in archaeology. So the issue of scale is something that concerns the nature of data and the methodologies employed in archaeological research, not merely spatial dimension. A main concern is that the raw data is misnomer. Data are neither given nor constructed from the ether. Raw data does not exist by mere nature. Rather, all data is subject to interpretation. As soon as the data is interpreted, it is no longer raw. In contrast, let's say we find a Roman coin in medieval grave, the archaeologist cannot interpret that as a modern coin. There are material traces capable of resistance. In this sense, I'm not fully constructivist in my views. Furthermore, when considering evidence prior to its interpretation, we should first better understand the conceptual and technical elements of how scaffolding in the process of knowledge production functions. Scaffolding encompasses everything from disciplinary culture to training, the funding system, the institutional infrastructure, impact data construction. Consequently, we must take into account the evidence available in line with scaffolding. As concerns archaeology, it is not one-dimensional. Rather, it is collective in its production of knowledge. And according to Ludwig Fleck, we look with our own eyes, but we see with the eyes of the collective body, or our thought collective. As underscored by Robert Chapman and Alison Wiley in their book Evidential Reasoning in Archaeology in 2016, evidence is not just physical discovery of artifacts and contexts, rather the author suggests the paradoxical nature of archaeological evidence. They underline respect for ambiguity, for unexplained observations in archaeology as necessary to the field, necessitating for an omnivorous strategy. If we take all of this in account with case-by-case assessment and reflexive analysis, then we can better utilize all legacy data at our disposal. So we may find fertile ground to explore assemblages of the past as a multi-temporality phenomenon from the perspective of the periphery in the early medieval Balkans, which was intertwined with cultures, peoples, the reuse of materials, ruins, and graves. So this fact is reflected in my long and complicated title, Material Culture Acting from Beyond Time, Antique Artifacts in Early Medieval Mortuary Practices within the Central Balkans. Very boring. But this title also betrays my obsession with reuse of material culture. In short, I'm going to address the phenomenon of finding antique material culture in medieval graves and how we may examine those practices as important for small communities within their contexts. So, while there is no unified interpretation for the cases I will present, what these sites do share in common is a reuse, which itself is valuable as parameter in examining the response to social pressures of the past. And that's also interesting for our time. First, to get some housekeeping, I would like to be blunt in how we will approach historical periods, since no one seems to agree on them, even in the same archaeological department. So I know that there is a long and complex debate about prolonged late antiquity. For example, Daniel Jean offers his own view that there is a late antique network and demographic collapse initiating only in 7th century throughout the Balkans. The time spanning the 7th and 11th centuries is considered to be early medieval period in the Balkans, although sometimes even 5th century is conceptualized to be early medieval. It is delineated by the presence of migrations which culminated in the Slavic relocation into the Balkan Peninsula and the Byzantine asserting hegemonic dominance over the region in the 11th century. The evidence derived from the case studies I will present is determined chronologically to be narrow within the confines of 9th and 10th century to beginning of the 11th century. So please bear in mind that it was a tradition for early medieval archaeologists to make their explanation in accordance to migrations and ethnicity. So that's the reason why they generally see changes through the lens of arrival of new people and new technologies. However, as Robin Fleming noted, intellectual and academic barriers are present in this field, so questions related to this junction from the materiality of Roman world are rarely addressed in the early medieval period. Therefore, there is a modicum of novelty to what I'm talking about today. The Central Balkan is a geopolitical term. It's more or less where the present-day territory of Serbia lies, minus anything northern of the Danube. The Sava and Danube rivers form a natural demarcation line to the Carpathian Basin and had served as such between Roman provinces or between Roman provinces and so-called Barbaricum. So from the beginning of the 7th century to the end of the 11th century, no political entity achieved the long and indisputable supremacy over the territory. So that's why also this is an interesting territory. So, forgetting. Humans tend to forget things, we know that. We tend to forget the past as time moves forward. The forgetting can come in many forms, such as disappearing or being re-evaluated in new interpretation. When crisis comes, humans also tend to cling to past as having value, especially in terms of tactile materiality. As Alaida Asman points out, forgetting, selection, and filtration are all key aspects of cultural memory. Nevertheless, instead of understanding memory and forgetting as opposites, they should be viewed as intertwined phenomena. Something becomes worthy of attention and memory precisely because it has reached a new time through processes of loss and selection. These are There are many ways to forget. In this case, forgetting through repurposing is of key importance. The default rule is that a lion's share of the past must be forgotten, must be lost. However, even completely repressive relegation to forgetting requires significant effort. So the past shows resilience through its materiality. That was the case even in the early medieval Balkans. Therefore, it should not become as a surprise that the people of the past come across the remains of previous times. When necessary, in selected circumstances of death of loved ones, they may assign meaning to them through practices readable from our archaeological perspective. Within these concepts of memory and forgetting, I would like to draw your attention to focus on polychronic assemblages of material context that should represent a single time capsule, but strangely come from disparate time periods. Take as a simple example the common phenomena of Roman coins deliberately placed in a medieval grave in the mouth of the deceased, or Roman spolia as part of construction of medieval church. If we turn to French philosopher Michel Serres for a more philosophical point of view, he stated that time doesn't flow, it's percolate. The idea of which influenced Gavin Lucas and his work, The Archaeology of Time. Similar to historian Reinhard Koselleck, concept of the sediments of time in which time is neither linear nor progresses from one period to another. Percolation in this sense implies filtering. When applied to archaeology, we can readily see that some events or objects remain in effect and duration into the future, while others disappear forever, and some wait. They may or may not reappear as fragments. This concept encapsulates all of archaeology. As archaeologists, we are not concerned with the past, but with remnants of the past in the present. Against this stands the academic tendency to put things in order, to categorize, to organize. The inertia of profession pushes for purification and separation into distinct periods instead of allowing for existence of polychronic assemblages. However, it is the coexistence of different times that can be posted as a key question of archaeology, that one that cannot come to the fore due to subdisciplinary or sub-chronological divisions. Reuse is generally an underrated topic, as it falls out of the norm. As an additional argument, it can be said that material objects are not verbal, and they possess an element of universality. Thus, materiality can connect worlds. It can connect what is disconnected, us and our lost worlds, such as the realm of life and death. As suggested by Alfredo González Ruibal in his Manifesto of Material Nostalgia, relying on materiality is the need for continuity, for overcoming ephemerality, especially in the face of death and loss. I would say that foundation for theoretical thinking on reuse of monuments is the volume, The Lives of Prehistoric Monuments in Iron Age, Roman and Medieval Europe, but there are earlier also books and articles. Deriving from Latin monere, to remind, a monument is something deemed durable, structures being reminders of something that once was. There is a biographical approach to the study of material culture, as well as sites and landscapes of deep, long-term biographies. There is a stark contrast between the monument and small artifact reused. The need to reuse old sites, whether they are ruined buildings, disused cemeteries, or prehistoric mounds, has been largely thematized so far. Permanency, durability, and resilience can be ascribed to stone structures recognized as monuments. In such circumstances, archaeological remains become agglomeration of multitemporality, which simultaneously include multiple epochs, but may not include all sequences within their existence. However, what about small artifacts from the past? In stark contrast to these monumental places and structures seen as ruins, smaller artifacts' appropriation is not explicit in its nature. there is a monumentality in monuments surviving. We may be ignorant of their existence, or they might be destroyed, but monuments demand some response due to their sheer size and presence. Reused small objects, on the other hand, can be discovered by chance or could be in circulation as heirlooms. So, in any case, as according to work of Thomas Mayer, remnants of the past can be taken as evidence, testimony, and evocation. Oblivion and time enhance the meaning of what is preserved. This is not just an archaeological perspective. Rather, it easily could have been the perspective of the people in the past. What comes beyond time as a mysterious or rare artifact could be valued from the perspective of pre-modern societies. So let's move on to some case studies to make this theory more tangible. So there are numerous examples of reuse phenomena in the early medieval mortuary practices of the Central Balkans, which demonstrates interconnections in social and cultural constructions. There are generally, but not exclusively, medieval Slavic graves dating from 9th to 11th century, which were built up on the shoulders of the giants of Roman or prehistoric ruins. Cemeteries and individual graves from 9th to 11th century around the Danubian limes are most recognizable. So, since the data available are usually not systematic, I will select representative examples to better illustrate. So, the burial practices among the Avars and mostly South Slavs, as well as survivors and descendants of previous inhabitants within the Roman identity during the 9th and 11th century in the Central Balkans are focus of my interest. At this time, Christianity was introduced to the inhabitants of the region, but not consolidated under any political power. Instead, there was a vying between cultural hegemonies, while the Central Balkans was under the dominant influence of Byzantine Empire. Only in the 11th century was there a border outpost re-erected on the Danubian limes. So the monumental architecture of Roman period that waited until the early Middle Ages, although constantly rebuilt and destroyed, was preserved to sufficient extent as a display of power and grandeur even in Middle Ages when mystified as ruins. So let's get to the heart of the matter. So let me tell you about the weird phenomenon I discovered in some early medieval graves that addresses the importance of reuse of antique material culture. And it involves snakes, corpses, and Roman goblins. I'm joking, no goblins here, but really one of the most impressive sites in Serbia dating to the early Middle Ages is the Ravnaslog site in the present-day eastern Serbia near the Roman castrum and later Byzantine fortress Timacominus. Excavation at this site in 1990s uncovered 72 late Roman graves from the 4th and 5th century. And in addition, 65 medieval graves containing the same number of skeletons were found in the same area. For a long time, that was just one of the necropolises dated from the 9th to 11th century in Serbia at the location of earlier Roman cemetery. The majority of the graves are lined in rows, although elements of Christianity are present. There were non-Christian elements as well here. For example, eggshells, pots, pieces of meat, something like that. The early medieval funerary rite included the inhumation of the deceased into simple rectangular grave pits dug into existing Roman cemetery. The east-west oriented burials were arranged in parallel rows with overlapping graves. The deceased were predominantly put in the grave in a supine position. Artifacts were found in 40 medieval graves and included garments and decorative objects, earrings, rings, necklaces, buttons, pendants. Thank you, Christina, you are a lifesaver. Weapons, for example, knives, axes, arrowheads, and also pots. So From excavation in 1990s, among the medieval population of the graves were 12 males, 20 females, and 29 children, mainly infants. In total, 140 Roman and medieval graves were discovered during excavation carried out in the 1990s. During a small-scale protective excavation conducted from 2013 to 2015, an additional 53 Roman and early medieval graves were discovered. The recent excavation is not published in detailed matter. Only a few early medieval graves have been analyzed and published. So, according to bioarchaeological analysis conducted, the higher incidence of blood and metabolic disorders and evidence of reconstructed neglected skeletal trauma indicate that living conditions in the early medieval period were dire due to the poor medical care and malnutrition in comparison to the Roman population of the same site. So, all in all, these findings are common for medieval necropolises in Serbia, apart from snakes. So, apart from a mention in a book on the Ravna Slog cemetery, snake remains came to light in 7 graves, 2 dated to Roman and 5 to medieval period. The snakes had either been laid straight along the side of the deceased or partially wrapped around the waists and continuing straight alongside the humerus. Since snake skeletons are so uncommon in archaeological context, they were treated in documentation and published results as a purely natural phenomena in the 1990s in Serbia. So, which in short is not congruent with herpetological study. In other words, it's not highly likely to have naturally dead snakes elongated due to their muscle structure. Snakes like to curl up into balls, except when moving, and even when they slither are not straight. So, additionally, the graves containing snakes were not next to each other and only were found to be in female and children's graves. Either this is all a coincidence, we can say that, or these are very selective snakes about where they slept with dead, with strange back problems. I don't know. Clearly, there is something afoot. So consequently, only ephemeral drawings of graves with the position of the snakes remain to provide data on which to base an analysis and interpretation. So that's why I was talking about data and quality of data. I know maybe it was boring, but even more puzzling were 2 graves with snakes from the Roman period, in addition to 5 from the early Middle Ages between 9th and 11th century. So it wasn't clear how that was even possible. So how would you explain that? After I had stumbled across these findings and realized they deemed further attention, I became obsessed with snake remains being found in graves. So I asked around to see if anyone had ever heard of any similar phenomena. After much annoying my colleagues, I found some examples. So the best analyzed example of snake remains was published from early Copper Age grave in Hungary, as well as Iron Age deposited excavated between 1957 and 1961 in Bahrain, for example. However, culturally relevant snake remains for the early medieval Balkans have been recovered in Hungary as a neighboring region and found only in burial context dated to the period of our Khaganate from 6th to 8th century. So the 3 other examples are culturally and chronologically closest to the medieval context at the Ravna Slog cemetery site, with snake remains in grave, ranging from few vertebrae to the whole elongated skeleton. So here we can see one our grave with a whole snake skeleton or some snake vertebrae. Here probably part of necklace, or I don't know, we can think about that. So The Avar Khaganate existed in Central Europe between 6th and 8th centuries and the beginning of the 9th. The Avar came to Carpathian Basin, which was already culturally and ethnically diverse, you know that, in 568 AD, forming an empire following the model of empires from the Asian steppes. Under Avar control, the remnants of Roman populations lived in the territories of Roman Danubian provinces with Gepids, Sarmatians, as well as Slavic groups. The site of Ravnaslog is dated to period immediately after Avar Khaganate and lasting until the beginning of the 11th century according to primary typo-chronological datation. Additionally, Ravnaslog was highly likely not a direct part of the territory of Avar Khaganate. Therefore, the similarity may not be simply seen as a matter of direct cultural interaction, but might be transfer of migrants after the dissolution of Khaganate who were continuing traditions. For example, the snake remains were just a clue to something much more complex happening. So you can see. As a cultural deposit, the placement of snake skeleton raised more questions than answers. The three medieval female skeletons had snakes deliberately wrapped around their waists like belts. In two cases, the tails of snakes expanded up either to the left or right shoulders of the deceased. Moreover, the child graves, both from early medieval and Roman periods, containing skeletons of snake laid straight or either right or left side of the supine body. This clearly indicates that the snakes were used in the funerary practices during the mortuary ritual at the end of 9th and 10th century, so in the Middle Ages. However, the deliberate snake placement casts doubt on the Roman graves. So instead, I would put forward that it's highly likely that they are medieval with Roman material culture reused. That was my solution. So the so-called Roman graves, grave number 4 and grave number 53, both contain the remains of snake, with grave number 4 being rich in Roman grave goods, just that one, holding the remains of adult female. The snake remains were found along the right arm of the woman. Grave number 53 contains eggshells, but has no other artifacts and thus cannot be reliably dated to the Roman period. So just one as Roman, as you can see. So the assertion that these graves are not Roman but medieval would be consistent with the findings throughout the graves at the site, but cannot be conclusive without additional supporting evidence. The story of snakes and graves at this site can show us how the dissemination of material culture may go beyond the boundaries of time, as well as how new communities may be shaped from the past. So that is how I started to think about reuse. Is this phenomenon relevant for Ravnaslog site? Evaluating graves within the context of reuse may reveal the original intent behind their deposition as a complex phenomenon from the perspective of intersectionality. According to Howard Williams, the reuse of prehistoric and Roman monuments in Anglo-Saxon period was not accidental or practical, but deliberate. Additionally, according to Aurel Rustoiu, prehistoric and Roman antiquities are frequently found in the funerary assemblages of the Avar period Carpathian Basin, of which the majority were discovered and reinterpreted as magical objects having supernatural powers, able to heal or protect, placed in female and children's graves. So that's also indicative for my story. Fortunately, I'm a fortunate person, there are other remains that buttress the point. Additional mixed burial context containing typochronologically mixed date finds from both Roman and early medieval periods were discovered at Ravnaslog in 2013-2015 excavation. These data are more detailed than those of the snakes from 1990s. Among these, the most impressive is grave number 159, named Foxy Lady. This grave was found to contain skeletal fox remains around the head of a woman. The fox skeleton itself was found on the top of biconical Roman flagon. The woman was buried with bronze ring, knife, necklace made of glass bead, and 7 bronze earrings, all represented early medieval material culture. So it's not a lie. This admixture poses a clear evidence of intentionally composed assemblage at the time of burial using grave goods comprising Roman objects as well as contemporary objects. It is clear that some of the buried artifacts dating to the Roman period were deliberately placed, such as the Roman flagon, which clearly shows their intended reuse in a burial. It is therefore highly probable that flagon or any pottery found was discovered or unearthed from the local Roman ruins relative to the site. According to bioarchaeological analysis, the human skeletal remains could be ascribed to adult female, 40, like me, 45 years of age, who suffered from poor health. Degenerative lesions were found on her skeleton as the result of osteoarthritis, as well as markers of occupational stress are clear indication of heavy physical activity throughout her life. There were few teeth found in her maxilla, but all mandibular teeth were lost ante mortem, all of them. The grave comprised an oval pit where she was laid in supine position with the arms extended along the sides of her body. The fox was wrapped around the woman's head, lying on its left side with its head oriented toward the north. More precisely, fox skeleton was found in bent position, its head leaning against the left side of the deceased, while the tail was located along the right side and the right shoulders of the woman. It was likely a fully grown male fox, aged 2 to 4 years. Its skeleton is almost completely preserved. There are no traces to indicate the cause of death, but judging from the condition of skeleton, the fox was buried shortly after the death before rigor mortis set in. The unique context is analogous to our context with fox buried alongside human remains. It is quite clear from this archaeological context that reused antique items were of importance. These items would have been seen as a part of naturally occurring world in which they lived, similarly to snakes and foxes. By appropriating the items found in the landscape, in the ruins around them, they reiterated the traditions that were also found in our Kaganat. Moreover, among the reused prehistoric artifacts, there are certainly those which could not be found among the Roman ruins and which were common among our females in graves. So, apart from these unique graves, there are also contexts containing reused artifacts at the same site, clearly interpreted as medieval, despite the evidential temporally mixed grave find material. Medieval grave number 47, containing a young woman, 17, 18 years old, containing a necklace with prehistoric Scythian bronze arrowhead from the Iron Age reused as a pendant. The skeleton was supine, oriented east to west. A medieval silver earrings was found under the skull, and on the left and right shoulders, one spherical button was made of silver. Plated copper was found. So, impressive necklace of 473 beads was found around the head and neck area. It consists of glass beads of various shapes in white, yellow, brown, green, light, and dark blue. One bead was gilded, but the most interesting one is the mentioned pendant on the necklace, which is actually a secondarily used prehistoric bronze arrowhead of a so-called Scythian type. If the other reused finds of the Roman provenance can possibly be interpreted as accidentally found during the medieval period at the site of Ravnaslog used in a symbolic context, the Scythian prehistoric arrowhead must have been something placed intentionally in the grave. The secondary use of Scythian arrowheads is not random, but something that is typical for our context, again, they were typically found in graves of women dating to the Avar period. That's not me, I thought so. So, according to Aurel Rustoius research, 17 graves can be identified from the territory of Avar Khaganate in which Scythian arrowheads were found as pendants. In most cases, these are graves of women. The exception are 3 graves in which men were buried and 1 in which child was buried. Rustoiu assumed that functionally and morphologically, bronze arrowheads must have been recognized in the communities ascribed to Avar customs, in which they are reused as amulets, possibly associated with magic and healing. Necklaces containing charm items are associated with warding off evil, especially as pendants. So, based on what has been established in the archaeological record of common burial practices for women within Avar Khaganate, eggshells, burying the body with pieces of meat, pots, burial with specific animals like snakes and foxes, the percolation of antique objects is just one element of connected with past, which would have done during the time of extreme pressure and duress, as evidenced by the poor state of health and the skeletons. So now we arrived at case study number 2. Shorter one. We are lucky. With its exceptional strategic importance reflected in the defense of the border of the Roman Empire, as well as being crucial to the empire exchange network and trade hub, Viminatium was one of the most important cities on the Danube for the Roman Empire due to its military camp, stationing Legion 7th Claudia, and as the capital of the Roman province, Mesia and later Mesia Superior. The site is today located in eastern Serbia, near to the modern-day villages Stari Kostolac and Drmno. Although once a wealthy trading hub, the city ceased to exist no later than 5th century, it became the target of interest for early medieval population. You can imagine. Archaeological research conducted in the vicinity of the Viminatium, the Pećine necropolis, uncovered graves dating between the second half of the 9th century and the beginning of 11th century. The early medieval cemetery and its findings have not been published in detail. From what is published, the majority of graves contain the skeletal remains of women who had been interred with the gilded bronze and silver earrings, rings, as well as necklaces of glass beads with pendants. So, many necklaces were excavated from the Pećine site, made of a variety of colorful beads and the crescent-shaped pendants typical for Slavic context. But what is important here is the reuse of the antique pendants in medieval graves, such as amphora-shaped beads made of bluish glass and silver bulla with ray-shaped edges. One necklace with an amphora-shaped bead was found. Much like Scythian arrowhead, you remember that one, prehistoric amphora-shaped glass beads, such as the one found in the early medieval grave, are associated with the similar practices in the Avar communities again. These beads are originally dated to 5th to 3rd century BCE and originate from the Mediterranean context, from where they reached Iron Age communities and in the Carpathian Basin. And during the Avar period, amphora-shaped beads are commonly found in the necklaces of the female burials. During the Avar period, they were in the female burials, and it is most probable that they have apotropic usage and were probably exchanged across the Carpathian Basin in the early Middle Ages. So this reused prehistoric amphora-shaped bead was found at the Pećine site near Viminatium in a post-Avar context in female grave, echoing the Ravna slog site. Although evidence is limited, there are tendencies among the findings that indicate that the community buried at Pećine site is similar to the community at the Ravnaslog site. The mortuary practices at both sites contain reused antique artifacts that evoke practices known from Avar Kaganat in post-Avar period. These may have been migrant communities who settled new areas following the collapse of centralizing power of Kaganat, maybe, but maybe not. So, third case study, the Pesača site is located in Iron Gate area on the confluence of the small river Pesača in the river Danube. Archaeological research was carried in 1968 and 1969. During the excavation, there were prehistoric remains found as well as part of smaller Roman forts and medieval cemetery. The fortification was close to the Danube bank, which was probably a watchtower from 3rd and 4th century AD. As was common for medieval cemeteries in the Central Balkans, it was constructed around the ruins of the watchtower. So, in medieval times, the area was used as a medieval cemetery, small in scale. Only 11 graves were discovered, from which 6 were dug into the tower area, with the remaining 5 located 15 meters further to the east. All graves were laid in rows. The orientation of grave pits were east-west, with heads to the west and skeletons in supine positions. For several of graves, they were burial pits constructed of enclosures around the heads or consisting of small fragments of bricks and stones. In 5 graves, there were smaller stone slabs or bricks under the head. But the most interesting was the use of Roman bricks here to construct graves. These were placed vertically in conjunction with stones in area around the feet. All bricks had crosses engraved on the side facing to the deceased. Of these 7 graves, 2 also had inscriptions carved in a mixture of Glagolitic and early Cyrillic scripts. Analyzing the script, the necropolis is dated to 10th and 11th century. Grave goods were rare. In grave number 5, 1 iron hoop of a buckle 3 centimeters in diameter, and reused Roman coins in graves number 1 and number 8. So I need to go back. So grave number 1 is a burial of male adult. His remains oriented east-west with head oriented westwards. The skeleton was in supine position, so everything normal. The Roman brick was engraved with the cross and inscriptions. An inscription was placed upright near the feet. The inscription is in 2 rows and could be read as next to you, or next to Christ, or next to cross. If we assume that letters are a mixture of Cyrillic and Glagolitic letters, or Fedor as a male personal name, if we assume that all letters are in Glagolitic. And grave number 9, inscriptions on similar pattern, letters Mara, interpreted as a Maria personal name, or Mother of God, if we want that kind of conclusion. So, what can be concluded from the assortment of early medieval graves? Beyond the reuse of Roman ruins as well as coins entered with the body, the presence of engravings at the time of conversion of people in the area points to the lingering reuse of material culture in the process of Christianization, which was pointed into a cultural shift. These stand in stark contrast to other graves at Pećine and Ravnaslog site, whose graves are reusing material culture but in perpetuation of archaic practices to the standards of the time. The presence of wording in graves also point to the influence of Christian culture, whose writing system was predominantly used in a process of proselytization among South Slavs, which must have been important for these people buried at the site. And finally, conclusion. To wrap things together, what these case studies may indicate is that the new communities continue to be shaped from the past, where past material culture is selected and augmented in the attempt to assign one's own. This Examples of reuse show a human desire to assign significance to antique objects in the environment in which the past appears across the spectrum. Early medieval mortuary practices of the Central Balkans may demonstrate interconnections in social and cultural construction in a time of cultural shifts. Such phenomena of reuse reflect the theory of percolation of time, in which the artifacts within the local environment emerge as justification or magical elements of nature. The case studies here demonstrate signs of such percolation by newly settled small communities of Slavs and Avars in the early Middle Ages. So when we approach the reuse phenomenon using a case-by-case assessment and reflexive analysis, as we have seen here, it becomes clearer how reuse of material culture could be read differently. From the Ravnaslog and Pečine site, there is a potential pattern of desire to associate with earlier times. The practice of reuse common in our Kaganat coupled with manipulation of animal bodies, such as with snakes and foxes, were reproduced and highlighted among the post-Avar communities south of Danube. These communities could have been Slav migrants from Kaganat or a mixture of people who migrated from the lost Kaganat and who suffered from implied strife, illness, malnutrition, I don't know. The predominance of female and child graves receiving such practices signified multi-layered reuse and nostalgia for traditional as well as loss, vulnerability, resilience. And what is clear is that these examples are typical for the process of grieving and burial for specific cases of female burials in our period. In the case of Pesacha, reuse shed light on the appropriation process that provokes physical reordering of the past through supplanting newly adopting Christian customs where the past and present link in novel regimes of power. Roman bricks in these medieval graves are medium for express signification through the inscription of crosses and words. This site implies a more utilitarian and less of evocational use, where there has been a break with past customs due to the radical social shift reflecting to introduction of Christian church in the Balkans as a factor of social coalescence in the early Middle Ages. Things from the past, even remains and fragments, provide the stability of former security and belonging. Indeed, authenticity is still a valuable criterion when there is a discussion on how to protect archaeological heritage, for example. This may sound as something comforting, but its political dimension casts a long, dark shadow. The usage of past for present purposes to claim power or a right over territory is actively in service today for revanchistic purposes, such as the Russian invasion of Ukraine or Israeli dominance over Palestine. The same idea reared its ugly head in the wars of former Yugoslavia, where I am coming from, where slaughter was justified with the question, whose graves are the oldest? Who was here first? Unfortunately, when the dust has settled, there is always the reassertion that we are over such silly things and have learned our lessons, but wars of territory and past seem to re-emerge as we cling to parts of the past. The multiple lives of objects are not recognized due to the assumption of true starting point or essentialist authenticity. Everything after is just loss, alienation, and destruction, but not a palimpsest layering, and certainly not intertwined pasts. In brief, we should bear in mind the potential for abuse and the appropriation to manipulate when the past percolates into present. To draw on Gavin Lucas, can we therefore say that any past is finished? The present is overburdened with past. To counteract insistence on pure authenticity, there should be acceptance of multi-temporal nature of archaeological places and artifacts. This should not be perceived as a problem or barrier, but as an opening for novel agenda in archaeology. Why not? In conclusion, and in Žižekian spirit, instead of needing to find exact answers, let's embrace perplexity by materialities of the past and be confused about our beautiful profession, and let's enjoy wild, messy, and creative archaeology of multitemporalities. Thank you very much for your attention.